The spring of 334 BC found a young king of 22 years old on the easternmost coast of Europe. In Sestos, Alexander, son of Philip, hegemon of the League of Corinth, gazed across the Hellespont Strait. On the other side lay Asia, not just a continent, but an idea, the land of the Persians, the Trojans, of fabulous empires and unimaginable riches. It was also the land of his own myth, the land where Achilles, from whom he was believed to descend, had conquered eternal glory. But Alexander did not come as an adventurer in search of a poem. He came as a king in search of an empire. The 45,000 men who accompanied him, the disciplined phalanx, the lethal cavalry, the engineers, the surveyors, were the sharpest tool of the Greek world, inherited and perfected. By hurling his spear into Asian soil and declaring that land taken by the point of the Macedonian spear, he did more than invade, he claimed it. In that symbolic gesture, he didn't burn his ships, but he burned for himself and his army any psychological notion of return. The only direction was forward. The first move in a game of chess against a destiny itself had been made. The first major test came a few hundred kilometers away, on the banks of the Granicus River. There, the Persian satraps of Asia Minor had gathered their forces. They were the provincial nobility of the empire, proud and disdainful. In their war council, a voice of experience warned of the danger. It was Memnon of Rhodes, a brilliant Greek mercenary general in the service of the great king. His strategy was cold and logical. Avoid open battle. Retreat. Burn the fields and warehouses. Let the invading army, far from its supply lines, languish until exhaustion and bankruptcy in a hostile and devastated land. But the Persian nobles rejected the advice with contempt. To them, the scorched earth strategy was the tactic of a coward. They would not flee from a boy king coming from the barbaric mountains of the north. Persian honor demanded a direct confrontation, a cavalry duel in the open field where their numerical superiority and the bravery of their knights would crush the insolent. And they chose their terrain carefully. The Granicus was no tranquil river. Its bed was deep, its banks steep and slippery with mud. The Persians positioned their best heavy cavalry precisely on the edge of the cliff, turning the river into a deadly moat. Behind them, light infantry and a considerable force of Greek mercenaries awaited. It was a seemingly impregnable position. Any frontal attack would be massacred on the ascent. Alexander, however, did not see an insurmountable obstacle. He saw a tactical opportunity. Instead of attacking at dawn, as was the custom, he deliberately delayed his march. Under the afternoon sun, the Persians began to relax, their discipline loosening from the heat and anticipation. It was then, under their incredulous gaze, that Alexander gave the order, not for a probing attack, but for a full and absolute charge. The target? Precisely the strongest point of the Persian line, where the satraps and their elite were grouped. His hetairoi, the companions, the best heavy cavalry in the world, charged downstream. The clash was brutal. Horses stumbled in the mud. Persian spearmen stuck their weapons into the slopes. But the Macedonian onslaught, led by Alexander himself, his helmet with white feathers a beacon in the chaos, was irresistible. Alexander was not merely seeking to cross the river, he was seeking to decapitate the enemy leadership, and that is exactly what happened. In a fierce hand-to-hand combat on the very bank, several of the Persian satraps were killed. Without their commanders, the Persian cavalry, however brave, collapsed. Next, the Macedonian phalanx, maintaining its relentless formation, crossed the river and advanced on the Greek mercenaries. These, poorly positioned and without hope, were almost annihilated. The Battle of the Granicus was less a prolonged struggle and more a hammer blow executed with surgical precision. But for Alexander, every military victory was also a political act. He sent 300 sets of Persian armor to Athens with the dedication, "Alexander, son of Philip, and the Greeks, except the Spartans, dedicate these spoils to the gods." The message was twofold. It proclaimed a pan-Hellenic victory and at the same time humiliated Sparta, which had refused to join his league. Even more significant was his treatment of the approximately 2,000 captured Greek mercenaries who had fought for the enemy. Instead of executing them as traitors, the expected fate, Alexander sent them in chains to Macedonia as forced laborers. The message was clear and calculated. Greek unity was a project under his leadership, and his future empire would be built not only on the sword, but on the ability to absorb and integrate. The victory at Granicus echoed like thunder. Cities in Asia Minor began to open their gates, some out of fear, others in the hope of freeing themselves from Persian rule. Alexander's march seemed unstoppable. But an ancient and formidable threat still loomed over him: the sea. While his army advanced overland, the Persian fleet, hundreds of triremes commanded by the now Admiral-in-Chief Memnon, dominated the waves of the Aegean. Those ships were the sword of Damocles hanging over his campaign. They could foment revolts in unstable Greece, cut off his supply routes through the Hellespont, and land forces in his rear at any moment. Alexander faced the classic dilemma of all land powers: how to defeat an enemy that controls the seas. His answer was not to build a larger fleet. That would be expensive, time-consuming, and play into the opponent's territory. Instead, Alexander had a revolutionary strategic insight. He understood that a fleet, however powerful, is not a self-sufficient entity. Wooden warships need ports. They need docks for repairs, sources of fresh water, supply depots, and crews to disembark. In short, they need land bases. Alexander's strategy, therefore, was simply brilliant. He decided to deny the sea to the enemy. If he couldn't destroy the Persian fleet at sea, he would destroy its reason for existing on land. The game board became a methodical siege operation along the coast. The first major target was Miletus, an important port city. Alexander didn't attempt a naval blockade; he lacked the means. Instead, he surrounded the city by land with lightning speed. When the Persian fleet arrived to aid the defense, it found the port already under Macedonian control. Forced to anchor on a nearby island, the Persian sailors could only watch helplessly as the city fell. Without Miletus, the fleet lost a crucial foothold. But the real stronghold was further south, Halicarnassus. This was no mere city; it was the Persian naval capital in the region, with cyclopean walls and a fortified double harbor, personally defended by Memnon. Here, Alexander encountered total urban resistance for the first time. Halicarnassus was a prelude to the horrors of future sieges. Alexander erected monumental siege towers. The defenders counterattacked with fire and ditches. His engineers dug mines beneath the foundations of the walls. The besieged dug countermines to intercept them, waging subterranean battles in the dark. Nights were illuminated by the ominous flight of incendiary arrows and missiles. After months of colossal engineering and sheer willpower, the walls were breached. Memnon and the core of his garrison evacuated by sea to the citadels in the harbor, but the city itself was lost. The price was high in time and resources, but the strategic gain was monumental. With the main naval bases of Asia Minor in his hands, the Persian fleet in the Aegean was left without a home, without water, without food, without docks. It became a ghost force, floating aimlessly, logistically unviable. And then, in a move that seemed like pure madness, Alexander did the unthinkable. He dismantled most of his own fleet. The logic was brilliantly cold. Maintaining a large navy was prohibitively expensive and useless, since the enemy no longer had bases to use against him. He didn't need to control the sea. He only needed to ensure that no one could use it meaningfully against him. Alexander turned his greatest vulnerability into an irrelevant point. The mighty naval Leviathan of the Persian Empire had not been sunk, it had been rendered obsolete. Defeated not by ships, but by the conquest of the coast. The game board once again had been turned. While Alexander consolidated his dominion over Asia Minor, a far greater storm was brewing to the east. The King of Kings himself, Darius III, had left the palaces of Persepolis and Susa. The insolence of the young Macedonian could no longer be ignored. It was a direct affront to the divine authority of the Achaemenid Empire. Pressed by a court that demanded an overwhelming show of force, Darius assembled not just an army, but a spectacle of imperial power. From the Scythian steppes came mounted archers with their lethal composite bows. From the eastern satrapies, contingents of infantry in multicolored garb. At the center, the personal guard, the 10,000 immortals, whose name came from their ever-constant number. And of course, the cream of the Persian nobility in their heavy-scale armor. Ancient sources speak of an impossible number, perhaps 100,000, perhaps twice that. What mattered was the impression, a human multitude so vast that it seemed capable of swallowing mountains. Darius, in his magnificence, marched north toward the vast open plains of Syria. This was the perfect terrain for his army. Unlimited space for his cavalry to deploy, for his deep ranks to exert their crushing weight. Meanwhile, Alexander, after an exhausting campaign, fell seriously ill in Cilicia. The news that Darius was behind him, cutting his lines of communication by occupying Issus, was a shock. It is said that Alexander, feverish, rose from his bed and ordered an immediate march south. His army, now a hardened and confident tool, responded with disconcerting speed. It was then that Darius made the tactical error that would define his fate. Instead of waiting patiently on the Syrian plains, where his advantage was absolute, he moved. Motivated by erroneous information that Alexander was retreating, or perhaps by impatience to end the war once and for all, he led his colossal army through the defiles of the Amanus Mountains and emerged behind the Macedonian army near the city of Issus. In his mind, it was a brilliant move. He had cut off the enemy's retreat and trapped them against the sea. In reality, he had led his own giant to a cell. The battlefield of Issus was a death corridor. On one side, the steep peaks of the Amanus. On the other, the waters of the Mediterranean. In the middle, a coastal plain no more than 2.5 kilometers wide, cut by the steep-banked Granicus River. For Darius's vast and ungainly army, that space was a claustrophobic prison. Its ranks, which in open terrain would have stretched for kilometers, were compressed into a deep and useless mass. Only the men in the front line could fight. Their greatest strength, their numbers, became a burden, an immobile crowd that blocked their own reinforcements and escape routes. Alexander, studying the terrain, deployed his forces with the precision of a chess master. The compact and lethal Macedonian phalanx would occupy the center, facing the bulk of the Persian infantry and the Greek mercenaries. His companion cavalry, his weapon of decision, was positioned on the right, near the sea. The battle began with an advance in an oblique line, a tactical inheritance from his father, Philip, intended to engage the enemy gradually and in a controlled manner. While the phalanx waged brutal and static combat in the center, under a hail of darts, Alexander observed, and he saw. To cover the entire width of the narrow field, the Persians had stretched their line too far. Their left flank against the mountains was strong, but their right flank, near the sea, was thin, composed of a mixture of light cavalry and unprepared infantry. It was at this point that Alexander delivered his coup de grace. Personally leading the companions, he formed a wedge of cavalry and charged, not across the river, but along its bank, exploiting a sandbar. It was lightning. The weakened Persian right flank was utterly shattered by the concentrated force of the world's finest heavy cavalry. But here, Alexander demonstrated supernatural tactical discipline. He ordered a devastatingly precise maneuver. His squadrons turned 90 degrees to the left. Now, they advanced in battle order, parallel to the main Persian line, rolling the enemy flank aside. It was like lifting the edge of a carpet, an irresistible force sweeping everything in its path toward the center of the Persian army. And in the center, elevated in his ornate war chariot, was Darius III.
Alexander, his white feathered helmet now stained red, charged straight to that point. The battle around the royal chariot became a personal hell. The noble Persian bodyguards, the immortals, fought and died to protect their king. Alexander's spear broke. He fought with his sword. And then, amidst the tumult, the gazes of the two kings met through the chaos. One gaze of pure, fierce will, of relentless determination. The other, a gaze of growing terror, of a monarch who suddenly realized that the divinity of his office did not protect him from the spear of a fearless mortal. Darius, the king of kings, the lord of Asia, ordered his charioteer to turn and flee. In his panic, he left behind his royal shield, his imperial purple robe, his richly adorned bow, and most humiliating of all, his mother, wife, and daughters. The king's flight was the signal for total collapse. The Persian army, already compressed and unbalanced, dissolved in an indescribable panic. The carnage on the narrow plain was horrific. Alexander's victory was complete, resounding, but the true triumph, deeper than any battle, awaited him in the captured royal tent. Upon meeting the queen mother Sisygambis, his wife Statara, and the princesses, Alexander did not behave like a barbarian conqueror. He bowed, treated them with impeccable courtesy, and swore that their honor and status would be upheld. This gesture of calculated magnanimity was the ultimate humiliation for Darius. His enemy revealed himself not as a plunderer, but as a king in the true sense of the word, a man who possessed not only strength, but also arete, the noble Greek virtue. Darius was not only defeated, his family was now under the protection of his rival. The war had become deeply personal.
The path to the heart of the empire was open. With Darius fleeing desperately eastward, everyone expected Alexander to plunge in for a direct pursuit towards Babylon and the Persian capitals. But Alexander did the unexpected. He turned south, following the Mediterranean coast. Why? The answer was pure, cold, and visionary strategy. Alexander understood that a lasting conquest is not made with a sword at the back of a fleeing enemy, leaving untouched fortresses on his flank. Darius was still alive, and as long as the powerful Phoenician city-states, Tyre, Byblos, and Sidon, and strategic Egypt remained loyal to him, Alexander's position would be precarious. These were the last and most vital naval bases of the Persian Empire. Without controlling them, the still powerful Phoenician fleet could cut his supply lines by sea and foment revolts in Greece. Alexander therefore decided to dominate the Mediterranean not by building a fleet, but by conquering all its ports. He would tear apart the pillars of Persian naval power, one by one. This turn to the south marked a fundamental transformation in the nature of the campaign. The pan-Hellenic pretext of revenge for the Persian invasion of 150 years earlier was beginning to fade. In its place, a project of universal conquest emerged, and, in Alexander's skillful propaganda, of liberation. When his forces entered Egypt, they encountered not resistance, but relief. The Egyptians, tired of Persian rule, hailed him not as an invader, but as a liberator. In Memphis, he was crowned pharaoh, son of Ra, assuming the double crown that united Upper and Lower Egypt. His pilgrimage to the remote oracle of Amun in the Siwa oasis was not merely a religious curiosity, it was an incursion into divine kingship. He emerged from there and made sure it was known, with confirmation of his divine lineage. The warrior king was transitioning into the god king. But before Egypt, there was an almost mythical obstacle: Tyre. The island fortress city, with 50-meter-high walls rising directly from the sea, impregnable for centuries. While Alexander planned the impossible siege, building a breakwater across the sea to reach its walls, an embassy arrived from Darius. The offer was extraordinary:
a ransom of 10,000 talents, an unimaginable fortune for his family. All the lands west of the Euphrates River, basically the entire Persian Empire that Alexander had already conquered or was about to conquer, and the hand of his daughter in marriage, making Alexander his legal heir and sealing an alliance of equals. The old and cautious general Parmenion, contemplating the offer, is said to have remarked, "I would accept if I were Alexander." Alexander's reply would go into history, a flash of absolute ambition. "Me too, if I were Parmenion." The refusal was total. There was no middle ground, no division of the world. There could only be one king of kings. The war would continue until the total annihilation of one side. While Alexander began the pharaonic work of building a bridge to heaven, or in this case to the walls of Tyre, Darius fled east. He was no longer running to a capital, but to the vast heart of his empire, to the open plains of Upper Mesopotamia. There he would gather his last great army. This time there would be no straits, no mountains, no rivers to limit his forces. He would choose a field as vast as an ocean of land, where every chariot of scythes, every war elephant brought from the borders of India, every mounted archer from the steppes could be used to their fullest potential. It would be the final battle, the confrontation that would decide the fate of a third of the world. The setting was chosen, a distant place near an obscure village called Gaugamela, a name that would soon echo through the centuries not as a place, but as a verdict. Alexander now turned to the siege of Tyre, a challenge that would test not only his army, but his own imagination. Meanwhile, on the endless plains of the east, Darius was assembling the last great army the Persian world would ever see. 2 kings, 2 empires, 1 destiny. The next move on the board would lead them both to Gaugamela, and there, everything would be decided.